Ata Maria ki a koutou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou I tēnei ata. Nau mai ki tēnei Karakia, o te ata nei. Welcome to morning prayer today, Friday. It's good to join with you again in worship as the week draws to its blurry end. And whatever your circumstances are, no doubt there's been the usual ups and downs of lockdown, but it's good to constantly come back to the Lord and to share in prayer and worship and the scriptures together. Let's begin then with some words of preparation, a prayer to say together. Ke inoi tahi tātou. E te atua kārawa, e tūwhera ana ngā ngākau katoa ki a koe. E mōhiotia ana ngā hiahia katoa. E kore hoki e ngaro I a koe te miohuna. Whakahangia horoia o mātou whakaro e tō wairua tapu kia pono ai tō mātou aroha ki a koe. Kia tika ai ta whakanui I tō ingoa tapu, ko I hukaraiti hoki tō mātou ariki. Āmine. Ka waiata tahi tātou tō himini timatanga, ko tahi rau tōre tukau mā iwa o ngā himini. Kia ora anō. We're going to continue now with a reading from Psalm 144. You'll see the words come up on the screen, and I'll be reading from my Bible here. Kia whakapaingia aihoa tōku kāmaka, e whakaako nei I ōku ringa, ki te whawhai I ōku mai hao ki te tatau. Ko te atawhai mōku ki tōku pā, ko tōku paurewa me tōku kaiwhakaora. Ko tōku whakangungu rākau, ko tāku e whakawhirinaki ai. Ko te kai pēhi hoki o tōku iwi ki raro I ahau. E ihoa he aha te tangata I maharatia ai ia e koe. Te tamarā nei a te tangata I whakaaroa ai ia e koe. Ko te rite o te tangata kei te mea memeha noa. Ōna rā me te mea he ātārangi e rere atu ana. Whakapikoa iho aurangi ihoa ā heke iho. Pā ki ngā maunga ā ka pōngere. Ko kiritia mai he uira hei whakamarara I a rātou. Ko perea mai au pere ki whati ai rātou. Tō toro iho tauringa I runga, tangohia ahau, whakaorangia ahau I ngā wai nunui. I te ringa o ngā tāngata kē. E kōrero tika nei tō rātou māngai. He ringa matau tika o tō rātou ringa, tika tō rātou ringa matau. Ka waiatatia I ahau he waiata hau ki a koe e te atua. Ka hīmini atu ahau ki a koe I runga I te hātere aho te kau. Ko ia te kaiho mai I te whakaoranga ki ngā kingi, te kai whakaora I a rāwiri I tāna ponanga, I tō hoari whakamate. Tangohia ahau, whakaorangia hoki I ngā ringa o ngā tāngata kē. E kōrero tika nei o rātou māngai, he ringa matau tika tō rātou ringa matau. Kia rite a mātou tama I tō rātou tai tamarikitanga, ki ngā māhuri e tupu ake ane. A mātou tā māhine hoki ki ngā kōhatu kokonga. Whakapaipai rawa no te whare rangatira te tauira. Kia ki a mātou pākoro mō te tika noa atu I tēnā mea. Kia mano kia tini ngā hua o a mātou hipi I o mātou pārai. Kia tai maha a mātou kau I ngā pīkaunga. Kia kāhore he pākuratanga mai ki roto, he whatinga atu hoki ki waho. Kia kāhore he aue I o mātou huarahi. Ka hari te iwi e pēnāna, ka hari te iwi ko I hoa nei tō rātou atua. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. Oops. Must have missed out part of the words on the screen there. I apologise about that, and thank you for bearing with me. I'm trying to keep up the practice of reading in Te Reo Māori and keeping it going on screen. Sometimes I lose my place going backwards and forwards, and I hope you'll forgive me for that. I think it was 2 years ago actually, so not this year, not the year before, but the year before that, on Anzac Day, I was up at Mahurihuri Marae, and part of what happened there for the Anzac Day commemoration was that there was a book being discussed, presented and so forth about A Company from the Maori Battalion. One of the things that I've noticed in those Anzac Day celebrations and those Anzac Day commemorations at least, is that they've in fact become less of a celebration over time, because there's an awareness that not all the wars that have been fought are really just wars, that we can celebrate the victory of those who fought in a righteous war. I think almost always we were able to come together around the Second World War and the Maori Battalion there. That's a high point in looking back on that. Ngā toa, those people who were victorious at that time, and who were victorious, I think, very much against the evils of imperialism and so forth. But as time has gone on, I think people have also realised, I heard this this year in the Anzac Day service up at Holy Sepulchre, when Bishop Kittle was preaching there about the fact that in the First World War, it's probably not a war that we should have got involved in, probably not a war that we should have fought. And so therefore, while we commemorate those who went, those who served and who sacrificed, at the same time there's, I guess, a sense there that that the story is conflicted and there's a mix of both good and bad in it. It's especially the case when we look at the wars that have been fought in this land. Those who fought often represented imperial power themselves, and we can find those kohatu scattered around the place which commemorate the imperial soldiers who fought, but don't commemorate the Maori who fought against them on the side of justice. We might also, if we're truly open and honest, think that some of the other wars that were fought amongst our own people don't truly represent justice and righteousness. Nevertheless, we're able to look back on the Second World War and to celebrate, I guess, those who fought there, because it was such a clear-cut, even if a very rare situation, of things being very much about the opposition of evil and celebrating the fight for righteousness and justice. Psalm 144, I think, can ring a little bit oddly to us because of the celebration of the king being prepared for war and for battle. We don't perhaps like those stories of fighting, those stories of military victory, of a conquering king, in quite the same way these days, because we're so aware of our own conflicted connection with war and with battle. And so it's a lot harder for us to read this psalm and to appreciate what it's talking about, because we don't often experience human war as a true fight for justice and against evil. In fact, the more we examine these things, the more we find that human wars are almost always a great mix of both good and bad in trying to fight against each other. And if anything, war represents primarily the great brokenness of humanity, that we do fight in this way. And so even when there is a victor, the last thing we'd want to do is to write a psalm like this one, celebrating that victory. But still, I think we see in the Second World War that whilst all war represents brokenness, not all war is in quite the same category. And there are those times when a great evil arises amongst humanity, and it is right and good to oppose it. And even if our conduct in war makes us hope that no war ever occurs again, we still hope to see evil overcome and justice brought about. And sometimes that requires an exercise of power. But even in this psalm, the psalm which is attributed to David, we recognise that there is something incredibly broken about human involvement and capacity for fighting, that means that even David's own story, even when he was fighting on the side of justice, means that our hope cannot be bound up simply in his victory. That's why as Christians our hope turns always from a merely human king, from a merely human soldier and a merely human victor, to the story of Jesus Christ himself, who fights against injustice by giving everything up, but who also promises that one day he will return and bring true justice. And Jesus himself uses these similar words of victory, of battle and of war, to describe the immensity of the conflict between evil and good in the world, and to describe what he says he will do one day to evil finally. These words are words which, taken up as words describing Jesus, his actions on the cross, where his victory was won, and his actions promised at his return, when his victory will be revealed completely. These words become in the person of Jesus an unconflicted story. They bring out all the good that we hope for when we fight against injustice, but without the corruption that we always bring to that fight. There's the story of sacrifice that is always there in the fight against evil, but a sacrifice uncoloured by any selfish act by Jesus. And so when we look ahead to the end of injustice, to the end of evil, to the end of unjust power in this world, we look ahead in the person of Jesus to someone who we can describe as the true King of heaven, the true King who is the Lord of armies, who is able to bring those to bear in a way that will never touch the innocent, but will only bring an end to the actions of the guilty and those who are evil. And out of that comes a victory that will never end and which will be unmarred, a victory that's about the restoration of humanity to what God created through the work of Jesus Christ on the cross and at his return. That is what we look forward to. And especially I want to encourage you that when we encounter something like the pandemic, of course, we see an enemy that's not really human, that's not merely human, We see the way in which the world is marred by an injustice that is not simply the actions of people, an injustice that touches the lives of those who can least afford it, which brings harm to them, and which we also recognise will be wiped away at the return of Jesus Christ. I runga I te ingoa o te matua te tama me te wairua tapu. Amen. Let's continue with some prayers, a prayer for strength and a prayer for peace. Well, or the Lord's Prayer. Kua hakona nei tātou e tō tātou ariki, ka inoi tātou. I tō mātou matua i te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tai mai tau rangatiratanga, kia mea tia tāu e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rita anō ki tō te rangi. Hō mai kia mātou ai nei, he taro ma mātou mō tēnei rā. Murua o mātou hara, me mātou hoki o muru nei o te hunga i harana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawia kia whakawaia, engari whakorangia mātou i te kino. Nau hoki te rangatiratanga te kaha me te karoria, ake, amen. Oh, here we go. Now we can pray for strength and peace. Ke inoi tātou. I hoa i tō mātou matua i te rangi, ka koe te atua kaharawa ora tonu. Nau mātou i whakaora ātaia notia te timatanga o tēnei rā. Mātou mea kaha, mātou e tiaki ai nei. Kaua hoki mātou e tukua kia taka i tēnei rā ki tahara. Kia rere rānei ki roto ki te mate, engari tohu tongia. Whakatikaia e koe a mātou mahi katoa, kia mea tonu ai mātou i ngā mea i tikana ki tō titiro. Ko ihu karaiti nei hoki tō mātou ariki. Āmene. E te atua, ka koe te take o te rangi mārie. E paingia ana e koe te ata noho. Mātu mohi o kia koe ka ora tonu ai mātou, he tino mahi rangatira te mahi ki a koe. Te aki na au pononga i ngā wā e whakahikia mai ai mātou i o mātou hua whawhai. Kia kore o mātou te hunga e oki atu nei ki a koe. E wehi ki te kaha o mātou huariri. E kaha no ki tō mātou ariki a ihu karaiti. Āmine. No, not the sermon now. I must have got the words all mixed up on my presentation thing this morning. Well, we are going to finish with the words of the benediction of the grace in a moment. Do apologise for the mix-ups on the screen there, but that's what happens when you do this stuff. Sometimes, obviously, it's the end of the week and I'll have to prepare better next week. In the meantime, I do pray that God will bless and keep you during this time of isolation, praying especially for you if you're an essential worker and are out there in the community. Thank you for what you're doing to serve others. Let's conclude then these words we share with each other. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki o ihu karaiti. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake. Āmine. Kia ora mai tātou. Hei kōnā.